Hello, this is Brian. Today is Tuesday, July 11th, 2023. I'm here in Ruffin Canyon Open Space Park, here to do a spotlight on shrubs video today. And today, I want to spotlight this here. This is Hollyleaf Cherry. This is Prunus ilicifolia, subspecies ilicifolia. The Hollyleaf Cherry is anywhere from a small to very large evergreen leafed shrub, sometimes reaching the size of a very small tree, and it's a member of the rose family, the Rosaceae. So what I want to start with is, since this is not really close to the trail, and this is a large specimen, I want to start off with kind of the form of this beautiful shrub. So as you see, this is a quite large specimen. It's probably about 10 feet tall, but I believe they can get even taller. In fact, this one here is much larger. Now it's probably closer to 15 feet tall. So when it's allowed to reach maturity, in other words, without being damaged by fire or mechanical damage, they can form these very large, open, broad crown shrubs that are quite leafy and sometimes dense. This one here, you can see, is pretty dome crown shaped and very large in size. So where I am in Ruffin Canyon, we're maybe a couple hundred feet, if even that, above sea level. And this shrub here, Hollyleaf Cherry, which ranges from basically Southern California and Northern Baja. I can add a little bit more specifics to the range here on the screen, but it's mostly found from the coast to the foothills and generally the lower to mid-elevation chaparral, usually from about sea level, and most records indicate it going up to 5,000 feet. However, I have seen this shrub as high as 6,400 feet in the San Jacinto Mountains in Riverside County. So it does have a very wide elevation range. I don't know if it goes much higher than that, but if you take the Cedar Springs Trail south of Idlewild, you will see this shrub growing up to more than 6,300, 6,400 feet in elevation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get closer to some plants so I can show you some more details. But at least you get an idea of the shape and the profile of it. And then I'm going to go up to some that are growing along the side of the trail, give you some more details. All right, so I'm next to a smaller shrub, smaller specimen here, along the side of the trail here in the middle of the wash. So you can get an idea of some of the more details of this plant, because seeing it from afar is not good enough. And showing it from afar is not good enough for me doing a spotlight video on a plant. So we need to get some of the micro details as well. So we have here, it's quite a leafy specimen here. You see here the leaves are kind of a medium green, kind of shiny leaves. And they're usually quite wavy edged and quite spiny along the edge, hence the name ilicifolia, the Latin name, and hence holly leaf, because the leaves are like a holly. These are pretty small leaves, but the leaves on Hollyleaf Cherry can get much larger, especially in shadier, moister locations. But typically, this is what you're going to see. Wavy edged leaves, shiny green, and spiny on the outside. Now, one thing about the leaves of this plant have cyanin compounds in them. So especially when the plant is wilted, the foliage can be very toxic, just like the seed pit. I'm going to talk about more of the fruit details momentarily, because I have some fruit on this plant I can show you. But so eating hollyleaf cherry leaves not recommended. And then in the springtime, they get these racemes of flowers that are shaped like this. You can actually refer to my pre-spotlight video I did high up in Mount Laguna at 6,000 feet from a couple weeks ago. I actually did a pre-spotlight video on this plant, and the ones up at Mount Laguna were blooming in late June. So the higher up you go, the later they bloom. But they are formed in these raceme-like clusters. You see here's an old dried one here. A raceme is kind of like a linear or cylindrical cluster of flowers that are small with really tiny 5 white petals, kind of creamyish to whitish color. Usually around mid-spring in the lower elevations to late spring in the higher elevations. And after they're done, they turn into these fruits, which are drupes. And like the name suggests, and sometimes common names of plants can be misleading, this case, it's not. These are actual cherries. These are actual edible cherries when they're ripened. When they go through stages of being green, and then they'll turn reddish and then like a deep purplish color when they're ripe. And when you eat the fruit, and it is edible, the taste of it could vary. Sometimes it can be pretty sweet. I've eaten Hollyleaf Cherry before, and I've had a couple that were pretty sweet, actually pretty tasty, and then some that were kind of bland and not quite as tasty. So your opinion of it may differ. But however, the thinness of the flesh kind of makes it mostly stone or seed pit. So the flesh is very thin on it, so you're not going to get a lot of fruit out of eating one cherry. But again, it is a wild edible. But don't eat the seed pit because it has cyanin compounds in it as well. But there you have it. Look at that beautiful cherry right there. So eventually these will get a little bit larger, maybe to about this large sometimes. And then they will look just like a regular cherry. And that, again, because it is a cherry. Main difference is this shrub grows more in the warmer climates here in Southern California, so it's evergreen. It keeps its leaves all year round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go take a couple of pictures of this plant, and I'm going to move on to another larger one on the side of the trail. So I'm up to a couple more Hollyleaf cherries right now. Leaves on this one tend to be a little bit larger, a little bit closer to what you'd expect for the size of the leaves on Hollyleaf cherry. This is another smaller specimen here, but there are some quite large specimens that I showed you off in the distance. Here's a much larger one here. I can't get up to it. Much larger specimen here. Some of these tend to be a little sparser, more sparsely foliated. I'm pretty sure that the previous years of drought have taken their toll on these plants, but they can get quite large, as I've mentioned, and there are going to be some more coming up. So while I'm on my way there, may as well discuss some of the habitats for Hollyleaf cherry, because it's found in a variety of different habitats. Now where we are, we're in a coastal canyon wash here, and so the soil profile here is deeper for the most part, and that allows the Hollyleaf cherry's roots to get down further. And the more soil profile equals generally more access to moisture. So in these type of coastal washes, it allows them to grow to larger size. And that'd also be the same for interior canyons as well. So sometimes these canyon washes we'll have some pretty large specimens. And then you can also find Hollyleaf cherry sometimes in coastal sage scrub, but its most preferred habitat is chaparral. Larger, woody-based, drought-tolerant shrubs that form a generally close-knit community in the sunny foothills and lower mountain slopes here in Southern California. And again, like I said, I've seen them up to over 6,000 feet in elevation, so they have a wide habitat range. And you'll find them again from these coastal washes, coastal canyons, especially on north-facing slopes until you get higher up. Then you'll see more on south-facing slopes. And then sometimes they'll be found in the understory of oak woodland and sometimes pine forest. And then they're also found towards the desert side of the mountains. So you'll find them from coast to the desert side of the mountains, but I don't believe down into true desert, because they like a little bit more moisture. So mostly here in Southern California and northern Baja, we're going to find this shrub. So in my next clip, I'll be over next to a very large one. I can show you some details like the bark and everything. All right, so I'm here at a large trail side, Hollyleaf cherry. Again, here we go. Relatively small, kind of wavy leaves. And also one thing you'll notice is a lot of times they're folded at the midrib, so they're kind of folded up almost a little bit like a taco. One other thing you'll notice. And we get these small brownish twigs when the twigs are young with the new growth, greenish brown, going down to a light, relatively smooth gray. And then the bark becomes dark and furrowed with age. So here's the bark of your Hollyleaf cherry. Let's see if I can get to it without scraping myself up too much. Here's the bark of a very mature Prunus ilicifolia, subspecies ilicifolia. Very mature, dark and furrowed. So this is an example of one you'll find in these coastal canyons and lower elevation canyons that have deeper soil profiles. So this is when they get very large. And this is a beautiful specimen right here. And the ones, like I mentioned, the size of the leaves is quite variable. You see the leaves here in the lower canopy are actually flatter. They're a little bit flatter because the ones in the sun are usually wrinkly, wavy, curled up. And that's to help retard moisture loss out of the leaves, to stave off as much moisture loss. So the leaves have smaller surface area. They're somewhat thick. They're not as thick and waxy. They are waxy, but they're not as thick as a lot of other chaparral shrubs that I've seen. But they do get kind of thick and rigid in the sunniest and driest locations. So again, see the leaves in the higher part of the canopy of the shrub are much smaller, and the ones in the lower portion of the canopy are larger and flatter because there's less sunlight. So the leaves actually need to be flatter and a little bit wider in surface area to get a little bit more sunlight for photosynthesis, A, and B, they don't need to be as small and wavy because they don't need to stave off the direct effects of the sun as you would in the outer part of the canopy. And that's a common strategy in pretty much everything out here. The ones on the outside don't need to be as large, and plus they need to be smaller so we don't lose as much moisture through transpiration. So there you go. You got beautiful trunks on this. Like this is mostly a multi-trunk shrub. So sometimes quite large, like this Hollyleaf Cherry right here. And this one doesn't have nearly as much fruit on it. I don't think I only see maybe 1 or 2 cherries hanging from this one. That's why I didn't start with this. That's why I didn't, that's why I kind of didn't start with this one. I was looking for other ones that had more fruit on them. But this one, again, you'll see some of these plants are kind of sparsely foliated, probably due to the effects of many drought years here. So they have been affected a little bit, but it still has a lot of strong foliage left on it. And I suspect this thing will be around for a while. I can suspect that these can live for many decades, if not maybe even a century or more. I get the impression that these do live quite a while. And like most of our chaparral shrubs, they will resprout from their root crowns, their aka lignotuber or root burl, when fire or coppicing meaning cutting all the way down to the ground, occurs. They are prone to resprout, and that is one of their survival strategies. So I did mention that the fruit is a cherry, so it means it's called a drupe, a stone fruit. And it has a hard seed pit like your regular cherries do. Here's a small one here. This one has a little cherry on it. So they do have pits in them. And I've heard that their viability is supposed to be quite low. From what I've read, that usually animals that eat the cherries pass them through their digestive system. The digestive juices effectively scarify the seed pits, allowing the seed to be able to germinate. So that's what I've read. I've actually been able to germinate Hollyleaf Cherry before. I had a couple Hollyleaf Cherries. I missed them. I don't have them anymore, unfortunately. But what I did is I soaked the seeds for a couple days, and then they started cracking, and I planted them, and then they actually germinated. So, and I read about them being harder to germinate after the fact that I did them, so it's kind of interesting there. But yeah, here, they really love these bottomlands, these lowland canyons. But when you go out into the chaparral, the chaparral, expect them to usually be a bit smaller, especially on more sun-exposed slopes. So don't expect to be seeing a lot of them like that. Usually in canyons, inside the canyons, where the soil profile is deeper, is where you're going to find them very large. So, well, we're going to probably wrap this up momentarily. Add maybe one more cherry before I end this video. All right. So I think we're going to end this video here at this last little section of Hollyleaf cherries. One right here along this trail here above the bottom of Ruffin Canyon. Very beautiful. And then we're going to go again with the foliage. And this one is full of cherries developing on it too. So, very beautiful native shrub here in Southern California. And a note, it does have a very close relative called the Catalina cherry. And that one is Prunus ilicifolia, subspecies Lyonii. So this one is the typical Prunus ilicifolia. The Catalina cherry, which will be handled on a separate spotlight video, is a taller, larger leafed, sometimes more tree-like subspecies of the Hollyleaf cherry. So hopefully I can find some of those. They do occasionally pop up here in San Diego County. And hopefully I can get a spotlight on one of those soon, because they're pretty cool too. They can get much taller, more tree-like a lot of times, and much larger, usually flatter leaves that are sometimes smooth-edged instead of spiny-edged like the typical ilicifolia subspecies ilicifolia. So this is basically going to do it for my spotlight video. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this one informative. This is a very long awaited episode I wanted to do, and I'm finally out here doing it. So be sure to check out my other spotlight videos for anything else that might interest you, and I'll see you on another spotlight.